The champagne in Natalie Jones's glass had gone flat, just like her excuses for being here. She'd been watching the same bubble cling to the rim for 10 minutes, thinking about how it was fighting the inevitable, and wondering when she'd stopped fighting hers. The charity gala at Terzo Piano had everything Chicago's elite required. Crystal that caught the light just so, oysters flown in that morning, conversations as carefully polished as the marble floors. 3 years ago she would have belonged here. Before Malik. Before she learned what the word justice actually meant in a city built on blood money and handshake deals. But none of that mattered now because he had just walked in. Macario Fiorentini didn't walk into rooms. He claimed them. 6'3" of Italian tailoring and controlled violence, moving through the crowd like a man who knew every exit, every weapon, every person who might become a problem. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they changed. Became smaller. More careful. Even the mayor's laugh sounded hollow now. And Natalie, who'd spent 3 years training herself not to notice dangerous men, couldn't look away. She'd seen his face before. Everyone in Chicago had. The papers loved him. The Prince of Printers Row. The last of the old guard. Photos of him leaving federal court, charges dropped. Photos of him at the opera, at restaurants like this one, living openly in a city that pretended not to know what he was. But the photos hadn't captured this. The way people bent around him like light around a black hole. How every person in this room was suddenly aware of the space between themselves and the man who could end them with a phone call. Natalie set down her champagne and watched him take a table near the windows. Alone. Always alone, she'd heard. No wife. No dates. Just bodyguards who stayed near the door and an attorney who made prosecutors weep. The room had almost settled back into its rhythm when the front doors burst open. Federal agents. 6 of them, vests and badges, guns already drawn. The kind of entrance designed to terrify, to remind everyone watching that the law was bigger than any one man. But Natalie knew better. She'd learned to spot bad law 3 years ago, when the officer who killed Malik for holding a cell phone walked free after 20 minutes of deliberation. Macario Fiorentini. The lead agent's voice carried across the restaurant, sharp with triumph. You're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and the rest of the charges disappeared into screaming. Guests stumbled backward, knocking over chairs, champagne glasses shattering against marble. 2 women near the kitchen actually ran. The mayor's security detail moved him toward the back exit so fast he left his wife behind. Only Macario didn't move. He sat perfectly still, hands visible on the white tablecloth, and watched the agents approach with the expression of a man who'd been expecting this. Maybe even welcomed it. Natalie pushed forward through the fleeing crowd. Close enough to see his face as they forced his hands behind his back. Close enough to see his eyes. That's when she saw it. What the cameras never caught. Not a monster. Not the cold killer the newspapers described. Just a man suffocating under the weight of a name he'd inherited, worn down by expectations he'd never wanted. Exhausted. Trapped in a cage made of his own blood. She knew that look. She'd seen it in her bathroom mirror for 3 years. The lead agent, Morrison, his badge said, was smirking as he tightened the handcuffs. She recognized him too. Everyone in her neighborhood knew Agent Morrison. Knew which family he really worked for. Knew what it meant when his cases went a certain way. The Benedettis had finally made their move. Clear the restaurant. Morrison shouted. This is federal business. But Natalie didn't move. She stood there in her white dress, her grandmother's gold ring warm against her palm, and watched them prepare to kill a man everyone was too afraid to save. Macario's eyes swept the room once. Taking inventory. Memorizing faces. When his gaze found her, the only person standing still in the chaos, something flickered across his features. Surprise maybe. Or recognition. As if he'd seen her too. Seen the person underneath the fear. They started moving him toward the door. Natalie's feet carried her forward before her brain caught up. Wait. Her voice sounded strange. Too loud. Wrong. Wait, I need to. Morrison turned, irritated. Ma'am, step back. I want to marry him. The room went silent. Even the sobbing stopped. I want to marry him, Natalie repeated, louder now, holding up her grandmother's ring so everyone could see. So there'd be witnesses. Right now. Before you take him. I want to marry Macario Fiorentini. Macario's head turned slowly. His eyes found hers again, and this time they weren't empty. This time they were searching. "Ma'am, are you out of your mind?" Morrison's smirk had vanished. "This man is. I know who he is." Natalie stepped closer, even as Morrison's hand moved toward his weapon. "I know exactly who he is. And I have the legal right to marry him before transfer. Emergency provision, Illinois Statute 750 ILCS May 209. Unless you'd like me to call my attorney right now and make this complicated." He was bluffing. Half bluffing. But her voice didn't shake. Macario studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, one corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. Something darker. More dangerous. "Yes," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Rougher. The voice of a man who didn't speak unless he meant it. "I accept." The restaurant erupted into chaos again, but Natalie barely heard it. She was still locked in Macario's gaze, wondering what she'd just done, knowing it was already too late to take it back. Wondering if she even wanted to. Before we dive into what happens next, if you're already captivated by this dangerous love story between Natalie and Macario, show some love by hitting that like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story is about to get even more intense. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And be honest, would you have proposed to a handcuffed mafia boss? The words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Natalie could feel every eye in the restaurant drilling into her back, could hear the sharp intake of breath from the mayor's table, the nervous laughter from someone who thought this must be a joke. It wasn't a joke. "Ma'am." Morrison's hand was definitely on his weapon now. "Step away from the prisoner." "He's not a prisoner yet," Natalie said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when her heart was trying to break through her ribs. "He hasn't been processed. He hasn't been transferred. Which means he still has rights, and I'm exercising mine to request an emergency marriage ceremony before custody transfer." "This is insane." A new voice cut through the chaos. A man in an expensive suit pushed through the remaining crowd, his silver hair catching the light. Everything about him screamed money and power, the kind that made prosecutors nervous. Absolutely insane. Vincent Costa. Macario's attorney. Natalie recognized him from the news coverage from the courthouse steps where he'd declared victory after victory. "Mr. Fiorentini, don't say another word." Vincent's eyes were on Natalie now, assessing, calculating. "And you, whoever you are, need to leave. Now. Before you do something that ruins your life." "My life was ruined 3 years ago." Natalie met his gaze without flinching. "When Marcus Deshawn killed my brother Malik in front of our apartment and walked free because half the Chicago PD is on someone's payroll. When I watched Agent Morrison here testify that the evidence was inconclusive, even though we had 3 witnesses. When I learned that justice in this city only exists if you're rich enough to buy it or connected enough to steal it." Vincent's expression shifted. Not much. Just a flicker of something that might have been recognition. "Your brother was Malik Jones," Vincent said slowly. "Not a question. And Marcus Deshawn works for the Benedettis now," Natalie continued, her voice dropping. "Same family that's paying Morrison to make sure your client never makes it to trial. Same family that's been trying to take the South Side for 2 years. You think this arrest is legitimate?" Look at his face. Morrison's smirk had turned into something uglier. "Trapped." Vincent's eyes moved to Morrison, then back to Macario, who hadn't spoken again. Hadn't moved. Was just watching Natalie like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Why?" Macario's voice cut through the tension. "Why would you do this?" It was the first time he'd spoken directly to her. The first time she'd heard anything in his tone besides that dark amusement. Now there was something else. Curiosity. Maybe even concern. Natalie thought about lying. About saying something noble about justice or second chances. But this man would know a lie. Men like him built empires on knowing when people were lying. "Because everyone deserves someone to fight for them," she said simply. "And because I've got nothing left to lose." That wasn't entirely true. He had the gallery. Had friends who would stop speaking to her after tonight. Had a carefully rebuilt life that was about to burn down. But looking into Macario Fiorentini's dark eyes, seeing the ghost of something human underneath all that controlled violence, she knew she was going to do this anyway. Vincent opened his mouth, probably to argue, to talk sense into both of them. Macario spoke first. Do it. 2 words. Quiet. Final. Vincent's face went pale. Macario. You heard the lady, Vincent. She wants to get married. That dangerous half-smile was back. And I find myself intrigued. Morrison grabbed Natalie's arm. This is not. Touch her again, Macario said softly, and you won't make it to your car. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Morrison's hand fell away. Vincent closed his eyes for a long moment, like a man accepting the inevitable. When he opened them again, he was already reaching for his phone. I'll need 2 hours, he said. The Cook County Courthouse smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Natalie had been here before for Malik's case, but never like this. Never as the woman in a white dress about to marry Chicago's most feared crime lord, while cameras flashed outside and her phone buzzed with increasingly frantic messages from everyone she'd ever known. 48 hours. That's all it had taken for Vincent Costa to move mountains, grease palms, and invoke legal provisions most lawyers didn't know existed. 48 hours for Natalie's entire life to shift on its axis. The holding room door opened. 2 guards entered first, hands on their belts, eyes sweeping the small space like Natalie might be hiding a weapon in her grandmother's ring. Then Macario. Prison orange looked wrong on him. The fabric was too cheap, too institutional for a man who wore power like other men wore cologne. But the chains, wrist shackles connected to waist chains, ankle restraints that made him shuffle instead of stride, those looked worse. They'd stripped away the tailored armor, reduced him to something the state could control. Except they hadn't. Not really. Because even shuffling, even in orange, Macario Fiorentini commanded the room. His dark eyes found hers immediately, and Natalie saw the question there. The same one he'd asked in the restaurant. Why? She still wasn't sure she had a good answer. 5 minutes, the taller guard announced. Judge Martinez is ready. Vincent appeared at Natalie's elbow, his expression unreadable. Last chance, he said quietly. The second you sign those papers, you're part of this. His world. His enemies. All of it. I know. Do you? Vincent's voice dropped lower. Because his organization is already asking questions. Enzo Crusoe called me 3 times last night. They think you're a plant. FBI day some rival families play. They think you're here to finish what Morrison started. Natalie's stomach twisted, but she kept her voice steady. And what do you think? Vincent studied her for a long moment. I think you're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Possibly both. He paused. I also think if you hurt him, you won't live long enough to regret it. Noted. Time, the guard said. The ceremony lasted 4 minutes. Judge Martinez, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, read the vows in a monotone that suggested she'd stopped believing in marriage sometime around her 3rd divorce. Natalie's hand shook as she slid her grandmother's ring onto Macario's finger, the only finger the shackles would allow. It barely fit. When it was his turn, Macario had no ring to give. Instead, he leaned forward as far as the chains allowed and spoke directly into her ear, his voice so low only she could hear. You should have run. Too late now, she whispered back. Yes, he agreed. It is. Judge Martinez pronounced them married with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a parking ticket. The guards moved immediately to escort Macario out, but he resisted just long enough to catch Natalie's eyes one more time. 3 days, he said. They'll process my visitation list in 3 days. Come see me. It wasn't a request. Then he was gone, shuffling out in his chains, and Natalie was left standing in a courthouse with a marriage certificate that felt like a death warrant. Outside, the media was waiting. Vincent had warned her. Dozens of cameras, reporters shouting questions, strangers with opinions about her sanity and her motives. She could see them through the courthouse windows, a feeding frenzy of journalists who'd just been handed the story of the year. Her phone buzzed again. Her best friend Simone, the 7th call Natalie hadn't answered. There'd be more. Her gallery manager. Her mother's sister in Atlanta. Everyone who thought they knew her, suddenly certain they didn't. Ready? Vincent asked, his hand on the door. Natalie looked down at her left hand. No ring there. Macario had nothing to give. But her right hand still tingled where his fingers had brushed hers during the vows, the brief contact electric despite the chains between them. Ready, she lied. Vincent pushed open the door and the wolves descended. But as the cameras flashed and the questions came like bullets, Natalie felt something unexpected settling in her chest. Not regret. Not fear. Purpose. She'd married a monster to save him. Now she just had to figure out if the monster wanted saving, or if he'd destroy her for trying. 3 days until she'd find out. The Metropolitan Correctional Center was everything Natalie had imagined and worse. Gray concrete walls that seemed to absorb light instead of reflect it. Guards with dead eyes who processed her like she was already guilty of something. Metal detectors. Pat-downs. Forms signed in triplicate. By the time they led her to the visitation room, her hands were shaking. She forced them still. The room was divided by a wall of bulletproof glass, thick enough that sounds came through muffled, distorted. A phone hung on each side. Natalie sat in the plastic chair and waited, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. A woman who looked too small for what she'd gotten herself into. Then the door on the other side opened and Macario walked in. No chains this time. Just prism blues and that same controlled grace even here. Even now. He studied her through the glass for a long moment before sitting down, his movements deliberate. Calculated. A predator deciding whether to pounce or play. Neither of them reached for the phone. They just looked at each other, this stranger she'd married, this dangerous man she'd bound herself to. Up close, without the chaos of the restaurant or the courthouse, Natalie could see the details. The scar above his left eyebrow. The exhaustion carved into the corners of his eyes. The way his jaw was set like he was bracing for a blow. Finally, Macario picked up the phone. After a beat, Natalie did the same. Mrs. Fiorentini. His voice came through distorted but still dangerously smooth. Bucking. Come to see your husband? That was the deal. Was it? He leaned back and Natalie recognized the posture. The same controlled stillness from the restaurant. The same test. What exactly do you want from me, Natalie Jones? She noticed he used her maiden name. A deliberate choice. A reminder that this marriage was paper thin. I want to know if you killed Tom Garrett. Whatever Macario had expected, it wasn't that. Something flickered across his face. Surprise maybe. Or respect. Does it matter? Yes. Why? He leaned forward now, his eyes boring into hers through the glass. Because you need to believe you married a good man? Because you need this to be a fairy tale where the misunderstood monster is actually a prince? No. Natalie's voice came out harder than she intended. Because I need to know if I'm fighting for an innocent man or just a different kind of guilty than what Morrison's selling. Macario's laugh was sharp, humorless. There's no such thing as innocent. Not in my world. Not in yours either, or you wouldn't be here. My brother was innocent. The words burst out before Natalie could stop them. Malik was 22 years old. He was walking home from his shift at the hospital. He was a nursing assistant saving for school. Marcus Deschamps thought he saw a gun, but it was a phone. Just a phone. And Malik died on the sidewalk while I held his head and Deschamps stood there with his weapon drawn, already working on his story. She hadn't meant to tell him this. Not yet. Not like this. But the words kept coming, 3 years of poison finally finding an exit wound. They investigated for 6 weeks. Found it was a clean shoot. Deschamps got 2 weeks paid leave and a transfer to a better district. And I learned that justice in Chicago depends on whose side you're on. She met Macario's eyes. So no, I don't need you to be innocent. I just need you to be honest. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Macario's mask had slipped. Not much. Just enough for Natalie to see something raw underneath. Something that understood exactly what she was talking about. I didn't kill Tom Garrett, he said finally, his voice stripped of its mocking edge. But I've killed men before. Many men. Does that satisfy your need for honesty? Yes. Why? The word came out almost desperate. Why does it matter to you what happens to me? Natalie pressed her palm against the glass. After a heartbeat, Macario did the same on his side, their hands separated by 3 inches of bulletproof barrier. Because someone should have fought for Malik, she said quietly. And because I saw your eyes in that restaurant. You're drowning in a life you didn't choose, same as he was. Maybe I can't save you. Maybe you don't want saving. But I can fight for you. I can make sure Morrison doesn't get away with this. Macario stared at her like she was speaking a language he'd forgotten. Then slowly his expression shifted into something she couldn't name. Something dangerous and desperate and entirely too human. 3 years, he said. My mother tried to leave my father for 3 years. Every time he found her. Brought her back. By the end she stopped trying. His hand pressed harder against the glass. You're already in too deep, Natalie. And the water only gets darker from here. Then teach me to swim. The guard knocked on the glass. Time was up. But as Natalie stood to leave, Macario spoke one more time, his voice barely audible through the phone. Come back tomorrow. I'll tell you everything. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered to Natalie's gallery in a standard prison envelope with Macario's inmate number stamped across the back. Her hands had trembled opening it, half expecting threats or warnings or some test she'd inevitably fail. Instead she found 3 sentences in precise, elegant handwriting that belonged in a different century. My mother planted roses in our garden every spring. She said they were proof that beautiful things could grow in poisoned soil. She was wrong, but I understand why she needed to believe it. Natalie read it 7 times, trying to decode what he was really saying. Prison mail was monitored. Vincent had warned her. Everything they wrote would be read by guards, catalogued, potentially used against them. So they'd have to be careful. Coded. She wrote back that night, her pen hovering over blank paper for 20 minutes before she found the words. My grandmother raised me on stories of people who survived impossible things. Middle Passage. Jim Crow. Streets that tried to swallow them whole. She said our ancestors didn't survive by being fearless. They survived by being stubborn. By refusing to disappear. She almost didn't send it. Felt too revealing, too raw. But she'd asked him for honesty. Fair was fair. The second letter came 3 days later, longer this time. My mother's name was Lucia. She was 19 when she married my father, 20 when I was born, 34 when she drove her car into Lake Michigan. The police called it an accident. My father called it weakness. I call it the only escape she could find. Your grandmother sounds like she understood something my mother never learned. That survival isn't the same as living. I've been surviving for 32 years. I'm not sure I remember the difference anymore. Natalie's throat tightened reading it. She could see him writing these words in his cell, could imagine the careful way he'd chosen each one, knowing guards would read them, knowing she would read them, knowing he was exposing something he'd kept hidden his entire life. She wrote back immediately. My grandmother died when I was 16. Breast cancer that she ignored for 2 years because she was too busy raising me and working doubles at the hospital. By the time they caught it, there was nothing they could do. She spent her last weeks telling me stories. About strength. About choosing to fight even when the odds are impossible. She said our people didn't survive by accepting what the world said we were. We survived by deciding what we'd be instead. You're more than what your father made you. You're more than your name. But you have to decide that. Not me. Not anyone else. The letters came faster after that. Sometimes twice a week. Macario wrote about growing up in his father's shadow, learning to hurt people before he learned to read. About his first kill at 17, a rival family's son who'd threatened his sister. About the weight of running an empire built on fear and violence and old grudges he'd inherited like furniture. Natalie wrote about Malik. About the gallery she'd opened in his memory, showcasing artists from neighborhoods the art world pretended didn't exist. About nights she still woke up hearing her brother's last breath, still felt his blood on her hands. They never said the dangerous things directly. Never mentioned Morrison or the Benedettis or the conspiracy that had brought them together. But the intimacy built anyway, constructed from shared wounds and careful revelations. Between letters, Natalie investigated. She met FBI agent Sarah Chin in a coffee shop on the north side, far from anyone who might recognize them. Sarah was small, sharp-eyed, with the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles inside her own organization. Morrison's dirty, Sarah confirmed, stirring her coffee with mechanical precision. Half the Chicago field office knows it. But he's protected. Too many people owe him favors and the Benedettis have reach. Can you help me prove it? Sarah's laugh was bitter. Help you? I can barely protect myself. But, she slid a flash drive across the table. Morrison's been sloppy. Financial records, phone logs. Nothing that would hold up in court alone, but combined with the right testimony. She paused. You understand what you're asking? If you go after Morrison, the Benedettis come after you. They're already coming. Not like this. Not yet. Sarah's eyes were serious. Right now you're just the crazy woman who married a mobster. A curiosity. But start pulling threads and you become a problem. Problems disappear in this city. Natalie pocketed the flash drive. My brother disappeared. Malik disappeared from every newspaper, every investigation, every conversation about police violence. He became a statistic. I won't let Macario disappear too. That night she wrote another letter. Told him about Sarah, about the evidence, about the path forward. Used careful language about friends who might help, and information that could be useful. His response came faster than ever before. Stop. Whatever you're doing, stop. These people will kill you, Natalie. They've killed for less. My mother thought she could outmaneuver my father. She's dead. You think you can outmaneuver the Benedettis? You'll end up in the lake too. Natalie stared at the letter, at the desperation bleeding through the careful handwriting. Then she picked up her pen and wrote 3 words. Teach me how. The restaurant where Enzo Caruso agreed to meet was the kind of place that didn't appear on any map. No sign outside, no reviews online, just a red door in an alley off Taylor Street where Chicago's old Italian neighborhood still remembered what omerta meant. Natalie had walked past it 3 times before she found the courage to knock. The man who answered was built like a brick wall with a face to match. He looked her up and down with the expression of someone evaluating a stain on expensive carpet. You're late. I got lost. That's not reassuring. But he stepped aside, letting her enter a dimly lit dining room where a single table was set. One man sat there, mid-50s, silver at his temples, wearing a suit that cost more than Natalie's monthly rent. His eyes were the coldest thing she'd ever seen. Enzo Caruso, Macario's second-in-command. The man who ran the organization while its boss sat in a cell. Mrs. Fiorentini. He didn't stand. Didn't offer his hand. Just gestured to the chair across from him like he was doing her a favor by not having her thrown out. Sit. Natalie sat. Her hands wanted to shake. She locked them together under the table. You've been busy, Enzo said, pouring wine into 2 glasses. Red, expensive, the color of blood in dim light. Asking questions. Meeting with FBI agents. Playing detective. He slid 1 glass toward her. Drink. I don't. It's not poisoned. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it past the door. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Drink. Natalie drank. The wine was excellent. That somehow made it worse. Macario says I'm supposed to help you. Enzo's voice carried the weight of a man following orders he didn't agree with. Says you're trying to prove Morrison set him up. Says you're not FBI, not Benedetti, just some woman with a death wish and a marriage certificate. He leaned forward. I think you're a liability. I think you're going to get him killed. And I think the kindest thing I could do is make you disappear before that happens. But you won't. Natalie forced her voice steady. Because Macario told you not to. Macario's in a cage. Things change when the king's not on the board. Then why am I still breathing? Enzo studied her for a long moment. Because I've known that man since he was 8 years old. Since his father started training him to be a monster. And in 32 years, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you in those letters. He picked up his own wine. So I'm going to give you 1 chance. 1 test. You pass, I help you. You fail, you disappear. Understand? Natalie's mouth went dry. What's the test? One of our guys, Tommy Rizzo, got picked up last week. Possession with intent. He's looking at 10 years unless someone comes forward who saw what really happened. Namely, that the drugs were planted by a cop on Morrison's payroll. Enzo pulled out a photograph, slid it across the table. A young woman, maybe 25, standing outside a laundromat. This is Carmen Suarez. He was there. He saw everything. But she's terrified. Won't talk to my guys, won't talk to lawyers. Thinks if she opens her mouth, she's dead. You want me to convince her. I want you to deliver a message. Enzo pulled out an envelope, thick with cash. $5,000. Enough for her and her kid to disappear if things go bad. You give her this, you tell her we'll protect her family, and you get her to sign an affidavit. Simple. And if I can't? Then you're useless to me. And useless things don't last long in our world. Natalie took the envelope. The cash felt heavy, dangerous. Like holding a grenade. Where do I find her? Address is inside. But Mrs. Fiorentini? Enzo's voice dropped. Morrison's people are watching Carmen too. They know she's a loose end. You show up asking questions, they'll know something's wrong. You'll have maybe 10 minutes before things get complicated. Complicated how? The kind where people end up in rivers. Natalie found Carmen 3 hours later at the laundromat from the photo, folding clothes with her toddler in a playpen nearby. She looked exhausted, jumpy, her eyes constantly darting to the door like she was expecting someone. When Natalie approached, Carmen's hand went to her pocket. Pepper spray probably. Or a knife. Carmen Suarez? My name is Natalie. I need 2 minutes of your time. I don't know you. I know. But I know what you saw. And I know you're scared. Natalie glanced at the toddler. I'm scared too. But someone I love is going to die if good people keep staying silent. Carmen's laugh was sharp, broken. Good people. You think I'm a good person? Lady, I've seen things that would make you run. My brother was murdered by a cop 3 years ago. I watched it happen. So no, I don't run. Natalie held out the envelope. This is $5,000. Difference. You talk, sign the affidavit, and if anything happens you use this to disappear. You and your son. New city. New name. Whatever you need. Carmen stared at the envelope like it might bite her. And if I don't? Then Tommy Rizzo goes to prison for something he didn't do. And the next time Morrison's people need to plant evidence, they'll find someone else to destroy. Maybe someone you know. Maybe someone you love. The door chimed. 2 men walked in wearing casual clothes but moving like cops. Their eyes found Carmen immediately, then Natalie. Time's up, Carmen whispered, her face going pale. Natalie's heart hammered. Back door. Now. They moved fast, Carmen grabbing her son, Natalie clearing a path through the laundry baskets. Behind them she heard one of the men shout. Then footsteps. Running. They burst into the alley and Natalie made a choice. Go left. There's a cab stand 2 blocks down. Go now. What about you? I'll slow them down. Go. Carmen ran. Natalie turned back to face the men, her phone already out, already dialing 911. Let them explain why they were chasing a woman through an alley. Let them try. One of the men grabbed her arm. Natalie screamed, loud, drawing attention from the street. People appeared. Witnesses. The men let go. Melted back into the shadows. When Natalie made it back to the restaurant 3 hours later, shaking and bruised, Enzo was waiting. Carmen's signed affidavit sat on the table between them. You're either very brave or very stupid, he said. Can't I be both? For the first time Enzo smiled. A real one. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Fiorentini. Now let's talk about how we're going to burn Morrison's world down. The financial records Sarah Chin had given Natalie told a story in numbers that made her blood run cold. Wire transfers from shell companies traced back to Benedetti Holdings. Payments that lined up perfectly with arrests that went sideways. Evidence that disappeared, witnesses who suddenly developed amnesia. Morrison hadn't just been dirty, he'd been systematic about it. Natalie spread the documents across her gallery floor at 2 in the morning, connecting dots with string and sticky notes like she was in some crime thriller. Except this was real. These numbers represented lives destroyed, cases thrown, justice sold to the highest bidder. And right in the center of it all, a payment of $200,000 dated 3 days before Macario's arrest. She photographed everything, uploaded it to 3 different cloud accounts and texted Sarah Chin. I have what we need. Can we meet? The response came back within minutes. Tomorrow. Navy Pier South Entrance. 6 p.m. Come alone. Natalie should have known something was wrong. Sarah never suggested public places. Never set meetings during high traffic hours. But exhaustion and adrenaline made people stupid, and Natalie had been running on both for weeks. She arrived at Navy Pier 15 minutes early, scanning the crowd for Sarah's small frame. Tourists everywhere, families with children, couples taking selfies against the lake. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a woman carrying evidence that could topple federal agents and crime families was standing among them. Mrs. Fiorentini. The voice came from behind her. Not Sarah's voice. Male. Familiar in a way that made Natalie's stomach drop. She turned. Agent Morrison stood 3 feet away, hands in his pockets, smiling like they were old friends running into each other by chance. Going somewhere? He asked. Natalie's hand went to her phone. Morrison's smile widened. I wouldn't. See those 2 gentlemen by the carousel? And the woman buying ice cream? They're all with me. You run, you scream, you do anything stupid, and a lot of innocent people get hurt. So why don't we take a walk? Where's Sarah? Agent Chin is having a very interesting conversation with Internal Affairs about leaked classified information. Seems someone sent them evidence of her unauthorized communications with a known criminal's wife. Morrison stepped closer. Funny how these things work out. They walked toward the parking structure, Morrison's hand light but unmistakable on her elbow. Guiding her. Trapping her. Natalie's mind raced through options. All of them ended badly. You've been busy, Morrison said conversationally. Impressive, really. Most civilians would have given up after the first death threat. But not you. You just kept digging. He steered her toward a black SUV. Problem is, you dug up things that certain people want to stay buried. People will know I'm missing. Will they? Your gallery manager thinks you're visiting your husband. Your friends think you've lost your mind. Who exactly is going to notice? The SUV's door opened. Two men inside, faces she didn't recognize. Get in. Natalie ran. She didn't think, just moved, breaking Morrison's grip and sprinting back toward the crowd. Behind her, shouts. Footsteps. She weaved between tourists, knocked over a stroller, apologized without stopping, and made it to the main pavilion before someone grabbed her jacket. She twisted, elbowed blindly, felt the satisfying crunch of cartilage. Then she was running again toward the exit, toward the street, toward anything that wasn't Morrison's black SUV and the ending it represented. A car cut her off. Different car, different men. She changed direction, but they were faster. 3 of them now, boxing her in, and people were watching but not intervening because this was Chicago and smart people didn't get involved. Someone grabbed her hair. Yanked her backward. Natalie screamed, clawed, fought like Malik must have fought in those final seconds. It wasn't enough. They had her in an alley. When had they reached an alley? And Morrison was there, his face a mask of cold fury. You stupid, stupid woman, he said. Then his fist connected with her ribs. Natalie woke up 2 hours later on a street corner in Englewood, bruised and bleeding but alive. They dumped her like trash, a message delivered. We can reach you anywhere. We can hurt you anytime. So, she made it to MCC on autopilot, barely remembering the drive. The guards tried to turn her away. She looked like a crime scene, but she pulled rank as Macario's wife, pulled strings Vincent had told her existed, and somehow found herself in the visitation room. When Macario walked in and saw her face, he stopped dead. The phone hung forgotten in Natalie's hand. Through the glass, she watched something break in Macario's expression. The careful control, the measured calm, all of it shattered. His eyes went black with rage so pure it was almost physical. He picked up his phone. His voice, when it came, was barely human. Who? Morrison. His men. Natalie's voice cracked. I'm sorry. I thought I was being careful. Listen to me. Each word cut like glass. You're going to walk out of here. You're going to call Vincent. You're going to go somewhere safe and you're going to stay there until I fix this. Macario. They touched you. His hand pressed against the glass, shaking with suppressed violence. They put their hands on you. On my wife. And when I get out of here, I'm going to kill every single one of them. You're talking about murder. No. His smile was terrible. I'm talking about justice. The only kind that works in our world. He leaned closer to the glass. You wanted to know who I really am, Natalie? This is it. This is the monster you married. And right now, that monster is going to do what monsters do best. Natalie should have been terrified. Should have run. Instead, she pressed her palm against the glass where his hand was, separated by inches and everything they'd never be able to cross. Then teach them what happens, she whispered, when they touch something that belongs to you. The courtroom erupted the moment Vincent presented the evidence. Financial records, phone logs, Carmen Suarez's testimony about the planted drugs, and Sarah Chin, who'd survived internal affairs by cooperating fully, detailing Morrison's relationship with the Benedetti family. The prosecutor's face went from confident to ashen in under 3 minutes. Judge Martinez, the same woman who'd married them in monotone, looked like she'd swallowed glass. Agent Morrison, you're hereby remanded into custody pending investigation. Mr. Fiorentini, all charges are dismissed with prejudice. This court apologizes for the miscarriage of justice. Natalie watched from the gallery as Macario stood, still in his prison blues, and met her eyes across the courtroom. 3 months. 3 months of letters and bulletproof glass and words that built something neither of them had planned for. And now he was free. Vincent worked his magic with processing. By sunset, Macario was out, wearing clothes Enzo had brought, looking like himself again. Dangerous. Powerful. Hers. They met outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Macario ignored all of it. Just walked straight to Natalie and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. "Take me home," she whispered against his chest. "Soon." His voice was rough. "First we make sure you stay safe." That's when Enzo appeared, his face grim. "We have a problem." The Benedetti family had moved fast. While the courtroom drama unfolded, they'd been coordinating their response. Vincent's car had been bombed in the courthouse parking garage. Empty, thank God, but a message nonetheless. 2 of Macario's businesses were hit simultaneously. And according to Enzo's sources, there was a contract out on Natalie. $500,000. Open to anyone who could deliver her in the next 24 hours. "They're making an example," Enzo explained in the SUV speeding toward one of Macario's safe houses. "Showing everyone what happens when you cross them." Macario's hand tightened on Natalie's. "How long to get her out of the city?" "I'm not leaving," Natalie said. "Yes you are. Tonight. Private plane too." The SUV's back window exploded. Everything happened in seconds. Enzo swerving, Macario covering Natalie with his body, more gunshots tearing through metal. The vehicle spun, hit something, a barrier, another car, Natalie couldn't tell, and suddenly they were stopped and Enzo was yelling and Macario was dragging her out. "Run." They ran. Through an alley, Macario's hand like iron around her wrist, pulling her forward. Behind them, footsteps. Shouts. More gunshots that made the brick walls explode in puffs of dust. Macario moved like he knew every inch of these streets, every turn, every escape route. He'd grown up here, Natalie realized. This was his city. His territory. And right now it was trying to kill them both. They made it 3 blocks before the black sedan cut them off. 4 men got out. Professional. Armed. Moving with the coordination of people who'd done this before. Macario pushed Natalie behind him, his body a shield. "Walk away," he said, his voice carrying that tone Natalie had only heard once before. When he'd threatened Morrison in the restaurant. "Walk away and maybe you live." The lead man laughed. "Benedetti sends his regards." They moved fast. But Macario moved faster. He'd been a killer since 17, raised for violence, and 3 months in a cage hadn't changed that. The first man went down hard, neck twisted at an angle that made Natalie's stomach turn. The second got a knife. Where had Macario gotten a knife? In the throat. Then someone grabbed Natalie from behind. She screamed. Fought. But there were too many of them and they were dragging her toward the sedan, and Macario was still fighting, but there were more men now, pouring out of a second vehicle, and something hit Macario's head. He went down. No. Natalie clawed at the hands holding her, trying to reach him. Macario. He looked up, blood streaming down his face, and their eyes met. He saw everything in that moment. Love. Rage. Fear. Promise. "I'll find you," he said. Then they hit him again. They threw a bag over Natalie's head and shoved her into the sedan. She heard Enzo's voice somewhere distant, shouting orders. Heard gunfire. Then nothing but the engine and her own breathing and the terrible knowledge that she was being taken somewhere Macario might not find her in time. The bag came off in a warehouse. Abandoned, judging by the rust and empty pallets. 3 men all armed. And standing in front of her, smiling like he'd won the lottery, was Agent Morrison. Surprised. He crouched in front of where they'd tied her to a chair. "Thought I'd be in a cell? Turns out the Benedettis have very good lawyers. I made bail an hour ago." His hand reached out, touched her face. 24 hours. That's all they need. By tomorrow the FBI will discover evidence that you helped Fiorentini run his operation. By tomorrow you'll be the story, not me. And by tomorrow, he smiled. Well, bodies wash up in Lake Michigan all the time. Somewhere in the city Macario was coming. Natalie knew it like she knew her own heartbeat. He was coming with all the violence he'd kept chained, all the darkness he'd tried to protect her from. She just had to stay alive long enough for him to arrive. "He'll kill you," she said. Morrison laughed. Let him try. But he didn't know what she knew. Didn't understand what she'd seen in Macario's eyes in that alley. He was about to learn. Macario found her in 4 hours. Not 24. Natalie learned later how he did it. How Enzo had called in every favor, activated every informant, put pressure on every person who owed the Fiorentini family anything. How Macario had walked into 3 different Benedetti establishments and delivered a simple message. Give me my wife or I burn your world down. How when that didn't work fast enough he'd started burning it anyway. But in the warehouse, all Natalie knew was the sound of the door exploding inward. The sudden chaos of gunfire. Morrison's face going pale as he realized exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. Then Macario was there, and he wasn't the man she'd married in the courthouse or the man who wrote letters about his mother's roses. This was the monster Chicago feared. The killer his father had trained. The predator who'd ruled this city's underworld for 8 years through calculated violence and unshakable will. Morrison reached for his gun. He never touched it. Macario moved like violence personified. And suddenly Morrison was on the ground, screaming, his arm bent at an angle that made Natalie look away. You touched her. Macario's voice was empty of everything human. You put your hands on my wife. Macario. Morrison choked on blood. Please. You hurt her. You took her. You made her afraid. Each word was punctuated by something Natalie couldn't see but could hear. Bones breaking. Morrison's screams getting weaker. And now you're going to die knowing that everything you did was for nothing. That you failed. That she's going home with me and you're going nowhere. Macario. Natalie's voice cut through the violence. Stop. He froze. Turned to look at her and his eyes were black holes. Nothing left of the man who'd held her gently, who'd traced her cheekbone with tender fingers. Just rage and protective instinct and the capacity for terrible things. He doesn't deserve mercy, Macario said. I know. But I deserve not to watch you kill him. Natalie met his gaze steadily. I deserve not to have this memory. Please. Something shifted in his expression. The humanity returning, piece by piece like watching someone surface from deep water. He looked at Morrison one more time, then at the other bodies scattered around the warehouse. Had there been this many men? When had that happened? Enzo, he called. His lieutenant appeared from the shadows. Make sure Morrison stands trial. Every charge. Every piece of evidence. Let the system have him. You sure, boss? My wife asked nicely. Macario walked to Natalie, produced a knife, cut her restraints with steady hands. And I'd give her anything. The ride home was silent. Macario's hands were covered in blood, not his own. Natalie should have been horrified. Should have been traumatized by what she'd witnessed. Instead she reached over and laced her fingers through his. Thank you, she said quietly. For killing people? For stopping when I asked. He looked at their joined hands, at the blood smearing onto her skin, binding them in a way no courthouse ceremony ever could. That's who I am, Natalie. What you saw tonight, that's the man you married. I know. And you're not afraid? Of you? No. He squeezed his hand. Of losing you? Terrified. But that's different. 6 months later, Natalie stood in the gallery that had been transformed. Still an art space but now also a youth center. Computers in one corner for kids to do homework. Art supplies everywhere. Mentors from the neighborhood teaching teenagers that there were options beyond gangs and violence. Malik's photograph hung above the entrance, watching over the kids his death had inspired her to save. Macario walked in wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. And every teenager in the room straightened instinctively. They knew who he was. Everyone in Chicago knew. But they also knew his money had paid for this space. His organization protected this neighborhood now, kept the worst elements out, gave kids safe passage to school. He was still a crime lord. Still ran an empire built on morally gray foundations. But he'd redirected that power, used it to dismantle the corrupt systems that had failed them both. Used it to protect people the city had written off. Mrs. Fiorentini. He still called her that sometimes, like he was reminding himself she was real. How was the opening? Good. 20 kids showed up. 3 of them brought portfolios. She moved into his arms right there in front of everyone. One of them reminds me of Malik. Same eyes. Same hope. Then we make sure he survives. Macario pressed a kiss to her forehead. Whatever it takes. They left together as the sun set over Chicago, painting the skyline in shades of gold and red. Tomorrow Macario would deal with a territory dispute on the west side. Natalie would meet with donors about expanding the center. They'd have dinner with Vincent and Enzo, plan next month's moves, balance the constant tension between light and darkness. But tonight they just drove home to the brownstone they'd bought in Hyde Park. To the life they'd built from impossible circumstances. To the love they'd forged not through redemption. Neither of them was redeemed and maybe they never would be, but through radical acceptance of who they truly were. I love you, Natalie said as they pulled into the driveway. I love you, Macario replied, and in his voice was everything. Gratitude. Wonder. The fierce protectiveness of a man who'd found something worth protecting in a world built on taking. They walked inside together, leaving the violence and the past outside where it belonged. Tomorrow would bring new battles. Tonight they had each other. And that was enough. What a journey. From a shocking proposal in handcuffs to a love forged in fire and darkness. If this story had you holding your breath, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. I've got more thrilling stories coming your way that you absolutely don't want to miss. My next video is dropping soon and trust me, it's going to blow your mind with another unforgettable tale of fierce love and impossible choices. Hit that notification bell so you're the first to watch it. And before you go, drop a comment. Do you think love like Natalie and Macario's can truly exist, or is it just a beautiful fantasy? I'm reading every comment. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.